Hello everyone. Welcome to the Tortoise Newsroom on this very sunny morning. It's a pleasure to have you all with us. My name is Barney McIntyre. I'm a journalist here at Tortoise covering climate. And I'm very pleased to be joined by WONDEROOM for this workshop as part of our Accelerating Net Zero series. Today we're going to be talking about nature-based solutions. It's a kind of undercovered but obviously very crucial topic coming up in the climate crisis. And we're going to be joined by a few panelists online in a minute to talk about kind of practical ways we can protect and kind of restore nature. But in the meantime, I'd like to hand over to Mairead Cahill, who is the founder and CEO of WONDEROOM, who's going to tell us a bit about how kind of we're going to do the next hour. Over to you, Mairead.
Brilliant. Welcome everyone in the room and online. It's brilliant to have you all here. So I think if we can cut to the slides. Brilliant. So we've come together with Tortoise to host this session, and I'm the founder of WONDEROOM, but we launched last year the greenhouse. And the purpose of the greenhouse is to work, and we work with businesses and private sector organisations and nature-led organisations to create, scale and communicate nature-positive solutions, because we know that that is critically missing and absolutely crucial both to the climate, ecological crises and also social challenges that we face. And it's opportunity to really drive the right solutions, create the right partnerships, and then communicate in really compelling ways, because storytelling isn't a sideshow to this, it's actually part of how you create impact. And so in terms of the, I've got the clicker, sorry, forgot about that. So for the agenda for today's session, we have an hour together, and how we've designed this is a little different to traditional thinking. And so we've come together, so we'll start off with an overview of the opportunity that nature-based solutions presents, particularly for business, because they're often missing from the table. We'll then move to some UK nature-based solutions in action. And we have three people from our community joining us there. And then we'll have a really engaged Q&A discussion here in the room, drawing on your questions and those on Zoom. And then we'll close with a little bit of a teaser of a collaborative opportunity for business here in the UK. So first, to set the scene a little bit on the state of play here. So obviously we're focused on nature positive, but given the premise of the session is how can nature-based solutions accelerate net zero and nature positive, let's just remind ourselves in terms of net zero, obviously there's a big game talked about lots of businesses committing to net zero and making pledges. And we now have 70 of the FTSE 100, so 70% committed to a net zero pledge. However, actually, when you look at that, only 29% have actual strategies to achieve them, and only 1% have short-term science-backed goals. So reality a little bit further away than the actual top line commitments. Then in terms of nature, we're even worse placed, quite frankly. So interestingly, CDP and IUCN released some data that showed that of their disclosing companies, which are around 3,000 companies, 97% of those companies, and these are the pioneering companies, recognize nature-related risks. Recognize climate-related risks, but less than 1% were recognizing nature-related risks, which is quite a big delta. And then on the opportunity side, 2/3 recognizing the opportunities on climate, but only 15% recognizing them on nature. So we're really lagging behind on that nature-positive biodiversity piece versus net zero, which even itself has challenges. So then interestingly, natural climate solutions and nature-based solutions is an interesting bit of a linchpin opportunity, because it obviously brings the two together, right? Carbon and biodiversity as well as community. And we know that it can achieve about 1/3 of the climate mitigation pathway to 2030, 1.5 to 2 degrees. But interestingly, natural climate solutions only reflect about 8% today. So 30% of the opportunity, but only 8% of the finance. And actually in business terms, beyond just the finance, that's public finance, by the way, private finance, even less. So there's a real opportunity. And what we say and why we set up the greenhouse is because there's a real missing opportunity here. Because fundamentally, just as the health of humans, us and nature are one and the same, we are nature, the health of business and nature are fundamentally connected. There is not one business out there that isn't, to varying degrees and in varying ways, dependent on natural resources. Whether it's soil health, whether it's water, whether it's physical infrastructure, whether it's food, etc. And actually every business, our challenge is every business out there needs to adapt and transform how it works with nature, and not by 2030 and certainly not by 2040, but today. And nature-based solutions is one opportunity, but a very powerful and underutilized one that businesses can start to engage with in the private sector to help support not only carbon and net zero goals, but broader biodiversity goals and also broader local community, jobs and business resilience. At this point, we are actually going to pause for a second and we're going to ask a little poll. I don't know how that works in the room, Barney, but that'll be fun. But certainly I know it works online. I guess it's a show of hands in the room. But we have 2 questions that we would like to ask at this point. So first question, I'm having to remember this off the top of my head, but it's how many of you within the room and online are currently doing nature-based solutions today? Right, so we've got about 25% in the room and online.
Just getting the results of the poll in. So we've asked a slightly different question. We've asked, are you investing in nature-based solutions?
Yep. So are you doing them? Are you investing or doing them today? Do we have, and you said how many online, Barney?
We've not got the results just yet coming in. So it's about 50-50.
Okay, about 50%. Okay,
yeah.
And about 25% in the room. The second question is, what do you think is the biggest #1 challenge facing greater private sector engagement in nature-based solutions? Biggest #1 challenge. Number 1, not a business priority, sufficient business priority, insufficient return on investment, challenges on metrics and certifications, 4th, lack of internal knowledge or resources, and 5 is other for those online. All of the above. Well, we're going to come on to that certainly in the discussion. Barney, any quick poll results coming through online?
It's coming in.
Everyone's
okay. Right, so it looks like 37% said a lack of internal knowledge and resources, followed by not a business priority, followed by insufficient metrics and certifications, followed by return on investment. So that's actually the least biggest challenge.
Brilliant. Okay, interesting. And if we go back to the slides, we'll pace through these. So, and we'll come on to these obviously in the discussion, because obviously all of those are contributing factors. I'm just trying to jump. Yeah, right, brilliant. So I think what we would say and what we're seeing certainly on our side is that most businesses ultimately view nature-based solutions as a functional opportunity to offset carbon. And that's really the current approach. And they're really doing that towards achieving net zero or to dissuade, quite frankly, consumer guilt towards sales of products and services. So those are the 2 key drivers. And often this is more on the business side in terms of mainstream business. And we could get into a discussion, which we won't right now, about quality of offsets and whether that should, that's a whole different question. But certainly it's a very narrow lens, predominantly on carbon as the main driver. And secondly, is the question of functional. Why is that interesting? Because most businesses at the moment are seeing it as a functional way to then say, well, we'll do wherever it is, we'll do that to offset the carbon, rather than taking a more strategic and holistic view as, given who we are, what should we be doing and what are the different benefits we can accrue carbon and beyond. And that's really where we come in terms of a different approach. Actually done right for business, nature-based solutions presents multiple opportunities. So obviously there's carbon sequestration to support net zero alongside real decarbonisation. Then we've got biodiversity and the protecting of business critical resources, which business is dependent on to operate. We've got supporting local communities and generating job opportunities, which is key. And then obviously providing health and well-being benefits for your people, for your employees and community. It builds business resilience that is adaptive to climate change. And that, of course, is dependent on the type of business in terms of how it can build resilience. And then lastly, but really importantly, it gives you a chance to do something that positively engages your people, customers and investors, because people can touch and engage and see and feel and smell nature. They can't do that with carbon. That makes it a unique opportunity in terms of engagement. What's really awesome, of course, is that they're really diverse nature-based solutions. It's not just one, there's many across land, sea and city. And we'll be hearing on some of those today, but we look across all of these. We don't believe it's about one, it's about how do you work across nature in a sharp and compelling way, and depending on the business or organization in question. This is really interesting because obviously we've painted a picture of a very sort of attractive landscape, right? Which is, you should do nature-based solutions, it's brilliant, it's a big opportunity, which of course it is. There are some very clear challenges though, because we know more engagement hasn't happened. So we would say actually the main obstacle to private sector investment isn't lack of capital, although a lot of people like to mention the lack of capital. It's that the current policy and regulatory framework and situation and status quo means that the risks of investing in nature at scale outweigh the returns as it stands. And so when we look at barriers to investment on the financial side, it's, and actually Financing Nature report just came out and was presented to Parliament yesterday, and four of the key elements they talk about as well is this idea of limited sources of revenue from nature because of the systemic undervaluation of nature, disincentives to invest, insufficient certainty for long-term risk, and then also to varying degrees a question around pipeline of scale and quality of nature-based solutions. Interestingly, what I would build on that from the business side, given the work we do with businesses on this, is that actually it's also just on the business side, it's a little different from the finance sector. I think on business side, what we hear a lot of is really this question around not seen as a sufficient opportunity and risk. It's not as important as, and the pathway to return isn't as clear as climate and carbon, complexity and unknowns in measurement and return on investment. And of course, lack of, as we saw a third mention this online, a lack of internal capacity and knowledge. So some real genuine challenges here to be overcome. We do see businesses doing it though. So we're already seeing, from eCover doing their Fertilise the Future fund to support nature-based solutions, to Unilever launching a £1 billion nature fund, to Sky and their oceans work, to Triodos Bank pioneering on financing projects. We're going to hear of one of those today, actually, the Wire project with the Rivers Trust, Patagonia and their commitments, also particularly around the right to roam, Bruichladdich and their work in Scotland on water, because it's such an intrinsic connection to whiskey. Riverford Fund doing their regenerative agriculture. The point here is the businesses are seeing the opportunity, they're getting in early, and also they're making sure it's linked to their business and what they can really offer. And then we would say, though, very few businesses are actually looking at the true potential nature-based solutions offer. And that's why when we're working with businesses, we really look to link it to a business's strategy, to its capabilities, to its supply chain, to where it's based, its physical presence, and to how it can really engage people and communities in a powerful way. And I'll leave you with one slide that is essentially some of the principles that we work to with whether it's the finance sector or the food sector or the fashion sector. And this is basically the key principles for a successful engagement by business on nature-based solutions. And the first is on the strategy side, to really link your nature-based solution strategy to your business, not as a sideshow, as a functional opportunity, but to link it to your business for greater impact, to look beyond carbon and to really stack the benefits, which actually is what nature-based solutions themselves have to do. And then on the impact side is to focus on really high quality partnerships. And we always look at that depending on whether it's land, sea, water. We always look at different ways to create partnerships on the ground to deliver impact. To secondly, explore different mechanisms. Don't just think about purchase of land, or there's ecosystem services that you can buy. There's ways to engage people. There's supply chain opportunities. Like there's a diverse mix of different ways that you can engage on nature-based solutions. Don't let measurement get in the way of positive action. The measurement and metrics aren't all perfect. Nothing is. This is a very, very complex space, and it is moving rapidly, and there is advances being made all the time. But there is enough in play to allow action to start now and to be creating value and impact now, and to be in pole position to then scale that up. And lastly is engagement. Actually, this is really exciting in terms of the work that we certainly do in terms of how do you engage your people, customers and investors on the journey using storytelling, using community and using engagement opportunities. So you're not just creating alone, you're actually really taking a collaborative and community-led effort. And of course, as part of that, involving local communities. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the landscape as it stands today and the opportunities. If we go to the slides, we'll see Here we are. So we selected 3 people across the community to bring forward and share their nature-based solutions approach, and in very diverse ways. So we're going to cover rivers with Mark Lloyd from the Rivers Trust. We're going to go to Josie at Thacum Group when we think about housing and the built environment. And then we're going to head to the Highlands with Jeremy to hear about Bonloyat rewilding and the work there. So initially, we're going to start with Mark Lloyd. Mark, over to you. And please, Mark, do let me know when you want to move forward on your slides.
Thanks very much, Mairead, and good morning, everyone. So if you put the first slide up, please, Mairead.
Yep.
The Rivers Trust is the umbrella organisation for 60 independent Rivers Trust charities based on river catchments in the UK and Ireland. So collectively, we employ about 550 people. We turn over £30 million, and we have more than 15,000 volunteers, and we're growing really fast. The important thing is we're deeply embedded in our local communities, and we really kind of understand their needs. We have 90 farm advisors who go out and talk to farmers and develop long-term relationships with them. So some might say we're the largest NGO many of you will never have heard of. We're trying to change that. And we advocate for the restoration of healthy rivers, and we help our Rivers Trust raise funds to develop a wide range of environmental improvements to rivers, and importantly, the land that drains into them. So we're really deeply focused on nature-based solutions, things like wetlands, tree planting, healthy soils, removing weirs and rewiggling rivers to make river ecosystems and their catchment areas function more naturally. So all these things deliver huge benefits to society, and many of which have monetary value. So we've been doing a lot of work to identify ways of securing funding from beneficiaries of these services to help pay for nature-based solutions at a much larger scale than we're currently operating at. Next slide, please, Mairead. In the past, we've relied really heavily on voluntary and grant funding, the kind of left-hand box on that slide. But this isn't nearly enough to tackle the scale of the problems on our rivers and their catchments. It's been estimated by the Environment Agency that £27 billion is needed just to get 75% of our rivers to good ecological status. Currently, only 14% of them achieve this European standard, which should have been achieved on all rivers by 2015. At current levels of government funding, it will take more than 100 years to do that. We also face serious risks as a society, as businesses, as communities from drought, flooding, and rapid declines in biodiversity, which are all going to get worse with climate change and population growth. So we believe that the solution is to weave together lots of different funding streams to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. Delivering solutions that only address one problem misses the opportunity for this synergy. Tree planting for carbon sequestration can be done with conifers in uniform blocks of land, or more intelligently, it can be targeted at the areas where water runs off the land and causes pollution and flooding downstream. Buffer strips of trees alongside rivers absorb pollution from farmland, and they provide vital corridors of habitat for aquatic life and shade for overheating rivers. And there are new markets emerging in nutrient trading. In many catchments, housing and business developments are currently put on hold because the rivers are already over-polluted with nutrients, and the additional sewage load would be illegal under European law. So to get the go-ahead, developers must fund nutrient offsetting, and we're building water treatment wetlands to do this on the River Wye. Next slide, please, Mairead. So often we need to find different sources of funding for different things, but really the magic comes when you find lots of different funding sources to pay for one project that delivers multiple benefits. Next slide, please, Mairead. So Churchtown in Lancashire is a small community which has been absolutely blighted by flooding. They've had 4 1 in 50-year floods in the past 20 years. and they don't qualify for concrete flood defences using the Environment Agency's cost-benefit analysis. So basically, they've got to kind of like it or lump it. But we've come up with a solution, which is to secure £1.5 million worth of green finance as a loan from impact investors to pay for natural flood management in the catchment. And natural flood management is, planting trees, ponds, hedges, wetlands, putting in leaky dams, and vitally restoring healthy soils. And using geographical information systems, we can identify where they need to be located to slow the flow of water the most. And often that's on steep slopes where farming is more marginal. And I mentioned earlier, we do this very much by consensus with farmers. So next slide, please, Mary. This model looks complicated, but it's really quite simple. The funds from the impact investors in the sort of top right are paid to a special purpose vehicle. And in our case, we set up a community interest company. And those funds are then paid to the local Rivers Trust and to farmers to deliver the work over 2 to 3 years. This creates ecosystem assets in the bottom left-hand corner, trees, hedges, and ponds, which deliver ecosystem services, reduce peak flows, less pollution, more nature, more amenity value, and of course, carbon sequestered. And then we secure buyers for those ecosystem services. And in the case of the wire, we found an insurance company, the Environment Agency, the local water company, United Utilities, which suffered from its sewage treatment works flooding, and business sponsorship via the Woodland Trust, the local council, and the local flood levy. So each of those buyers pays a small annual fee for 10 years, which pays back those initial investors with interest. And they have a representative on the board of the community interest company. So this is a model we're replicating now on a much larger scale near Leeds, in Cumbria, on the River Severn, and on the River Wye. And we hope to spread this, really across the country. The magic is that it front loads investment to get things done fast, which is important in a nature and climate crisis. But it also de-risks projects for the individual organisations involved. And we're working on new financial models to expand this approach of getting the people who benefit to pay for the benefits of restoring our environment. So please feel free to get in touch if you'd like to work with our network of local organisations. I really look forward to the debate. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mark. That's brilliant. And we'll have questions also at the end. So we'll now jump over to, I believe, Josie at Thacum Group. Hi, Josie.
Hiya. Thanks for having me today. I'm going to go through the connectivity on a development side and what it means for housing and the way that people live. So if you go on to the next slide for me. So just a bit of background, Thacum are a zero carbon placemaker. We deliver private and affordable homes in the south. I am their sustainability director and I'm responsible for the strategic direction of the business, and I do a lot of engagement with government and partner with expert organisations. So as I said, I'm going to talk about nature-based solutions and how it's intertwined with that acceleration to net zero by talking about my personal carbon footprint. So the stuff that's on here, well, exactly where it says stuff, that's actually my dog. That's the one causing the damage there. Food, it prompted me to see if I can eat locally, and what I've got in my local area is fairly limited. Travel, which is cycling and public transport, which is what it recommended to that. And home, it said I had to get solar panels. This was from the WWF footprint calculator. So I'm going to talk about what it means for people's personal carbon footprint and what we can do as a developer to help with that. If you go on to the next slide for me. So home was 17% of my carbon footprint, and we can take direct action on that one. So we've committed to zero carbon homes from 2025. And even for our employees, we're setting up a scheme so that we can use our supply chain and provide our employees with the most cost-effective way of getting solar panels onto their own roof and help give them a bit of resilience to rising electricity costs. Even the homes that we're delivering now, that when we put in the planning application 7 years ago, they said that solar panels were ugly. What we've done is we've created a setup where actually we can do the infrastructure install, which is obviously much cheaper and less wasteful at construction stage, so that as soon as a customer moves in, they can put solar panels on their roofs. So I'm going to give you a real life scenario on how nature-based solutions can accelerate net zero, and I'm going to talk about the ride to school. So we always think it's much better to target outcomes based on real life stuff rather than trying to figure out the real life benefits of the really technical things like transport strategies. So in comparison, that's why we talk about what we can do to make seeing a hedgehog an everyday experience, rather than talking about linear habitat connectivity improvements, which are obviously really important, but really what we're trying to get to is a world where seeing a hedgehog is an everyday thing. So the next big thing, other than the home, another big section of someone's personal carbon footprint is travel. So there are barriers that stop people actioning this and getting that percentage down. The first one is shed dread. It's the fact that actually, if I wanted to cycle anywhere outside of the home, the first thing I've got to do is go into my shed. I've got to wrestle it out of the way of the lawnmower and the kids' toys. I've got to drag it to the front of the house. And by the time that everyone's at the front of the house with bikes on and helmets on, we're all completely dishevelled and lost the will to cycle anywhere. So that is the first thing. Next slide, please. So the next one, range anxiety. So are you going to make it to your destination and still feel ready to tackle the day? How long is it going to take? If you've got an electric bike, can you charge it? The next one, is it on a busy road? Can you lock up your bike when you get there? Is it going to be safe and secure? Now, these are just a few of the real life scenarios for riding your bike to school, but let's overcome some of those. So first one, redefined house layout. So our zero carbon house layouts that we've been putting into plan applications from 2020 are redefined. It puts the cycle charging station, it puts where you lock your bike up, your storage for that at the front of the house rather than at the back in the shed. In some of those cases, we actually flip the entire view of the house so that you're facing into green space, and actually your car parking space, very much like if you go to Centre Parks, is more towards the back. And then the next one, these developments map out the 15 to 20-minute routes, making sure that they're accessible for everyone. And within that radius, we want to deliver places that have everything you need. So we do know and appreciate that people will probably move into our homes with this, what we call a 2-car comfort blanket. But we hope that with what we're doing, that they'll trust that they only need 1 car, and then in time they'll maybe reduce down to just the car club. But the way that we impact reductions in transport is not by taking away everyone's car parking spaces, because it just annoys them. And although that's a great way to build a community, there are better ways, more productive ways of doing that. So what we're trying to do is show that it's more convenient, it's more intuitive, it's more beautiful, it's more nature rich, and therefore make it more attractive to people to do the other thing. So finally, this is the important bit. Prioritising active travel has helped us create protected linear routes and meet biodiversity net gains of over 20% in those applications that we've been submitting recently. So we've been able to physically buffer these biodiverse areas away from the road networks, meaning that they are healthier habitats. And then the stretches are intertwined with walking and cycling routes, which means that we're increasing people's connection with nature. And the NHS Healthy New Towns principles show that there are direct benefits to health, even just to see a tree when you step out of your front door. So going back to that real life scenario, we want to make the ride to school more sustainable, and nature-based solutions are the key way to make this a consistent behaviour change rather than a one-off. We'll just go on to my final slide. We want to make it convenient and intuitive, and nature-based solutions help us make that possible. So they help our residents live lives that are transitioning towards net zero. Biodiversity is a key part of that, and it just shows how much it's connected between nature-based solutions and zero carbon. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you so much. And lastly, we're going to head to Jeremy at Rewilding in the Highlands of Scotland. Jeremy.
Thank you, and good morning. The first slide shows our purpose and mission, We're now operating on 2 estates up in Scotland. You can see them on the right, Unloit and Beldorney, trying to promote business in nature-based solutions. So we've rebranded. We're only 2 years old, but we've rebranded as Highlands Rewilding, and our purpose is nature recovery and community prosperity through rewilding. And in doing this, we want to try and scale rewilding both vertically by adding more land to rewild as we go, and horizontally by helping landowners, many of whom aren't really very familiar with some of the changes that are coming, to do their own natural capital economics. And in the next slide, you can see what we've achieved in our first year, 2 years, a summary of it. And we like to think, Myreed, that we would be ticking every box in your list of things that have to be done in this portfolio of activities. The land that we've acquired has an incredible variety of habitats, different types of woodland, pasture, peatland. It really is fit for purpose. We can show what can be done by land management that pushes nature in the direction of recovery and not a further deterioration. We've already generated a lot of data. I won't go through that. I just refer people who are interested to our natural capital report. I'll say a little bit more about it in the next slide. But sorry, I wanted to just run through the other things quickly. I do beg your pardon. And we're managing the land in a way that's informed by that data. So we're grazing cattle on a rotational basis to bring carbon down into the soil. And we've conferred widely. And one of the things that all the experts agreed on, they tend to disagree on an awful lot in this area, is getting rid of the monoculture conifer plantations, the spruce plantations. So we've acted on that. We've actually cut down thousands of trees, mostly Sitka spruce, for good scientific reasons to increase the biodiversity and the carbon sequestration using natives. We've been really lucky with the team that's gravitated to this project. There's so much interest. I leave folk who want to follow it to look on the website to see the caliber of the scientific firepower we have. And funders as well. Debt remains a huge problem, unsolved, market failure, but not so much equity. We've raised 7.6 million in our first round with 50 founding funders, mostly investing as individuals who are concerned about these things, but really see that we need to be making that ethical 5% profit or whatever in order to make the whole exercise successful. Partnerships can't operate without them. So the frontline natural capital contractors doing your soil carbon, doing your biodiversity through eDNA and observational techniques, and of course using all the space and drone-based sensors. So we've used a whole array of that and formed partnerships in so doing. And it's been great to see the way the universities have gravitated to this, the Scottish universities, and also Oxford University, who are just embarking on a 10-year program with us on these 2 estates to really take apart the biodiversity and the carbon and what we managed to do. Community, hugely important, and we've engaged, obviously, and we've engaged on both terrains with the local communities. And the biggest success story there is on Beldorney, where landowners up the valley are being encouraged to join our planting of a so-called Forest of Hope by a local community charity called the Cabrac Trust. And we've acquired infrastructure buildings ideal for nature recovery retreats, and that's going to be so important in helping that terrifying statistic that you showed, Myreed, about appreciation of all this. If we can attract corporates to come and immerse themselves for a week at senior and middle level management teams, for example, we can really contribute that way as well. Lobbying for the right policy environment, terribly important. It's easier to do in Scotland than it is in England. There's only 5 million people up here. And after a few weeks, you've met most of them. So, we're really optimistic that we can help shift the dial there. So in the next slide, a little bit about the data again, so important. This is what is going to crack it. When people realize that it's quite easy to get data acquired, and it gets less and less expensive as we do it at scale, and it can be processed by artificial intelligence, machine learning, so that you maximize the economics, then this is really all going to take off. And I think the work we're trying to do is to demonstrate that, we can make all this more investable by having rock solid, verifiable natural capital accountancy. And that way we cut out the cowboys. There will be many cowboys in this area. So I commend our report to you. You can download it off the website. And in the final slide, just some pictures of the infrastructure that is on these estates, which would be suitable for these corporate nature recovery retreats, and help us, correct that statistic of just the low appreciation of how important this all is still in the corporate world. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeremy. And Barney, over to you for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you. That looks gorgeous. So we kind of want to be there. But fascinating to hear about all of those kind of different ways that people are managing nature-based solutions. If you've got a question for Josie, Jeremy, or Mark, just raise your hand in the room, catch my eye, or we can go to you online as well. We've had one comment. I've got my own questions as well. But we've had one comment online that I think we might kind of want to touch on. I wonder if we can go to Billy Knowles, who's kind of raised this idea about how you kind of engage people in this, and an interesting point about how we engage kind of younger generations in nature-based solutions as well. So I wonder if Billy Knowles, if you're there, if you could talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, I can. I think I really love hearing about these amazing stories from nature-based solutions. They're really fantastic. My concern often is that there isn't enough accessible ways for young people to get involved in delivering some of those nature-based solutions and then becoming the champions for the future. So if we need to institute some sort of cultural shift where within organizations the mindset changes and we start to recognize the value of nature, organizations and in communities, we need that to come from a set of champions. And I don't know who is going to be those champions in those organizations. And I like to think about it in the context of how digital became such a big thing for organizations, and they all suddenly started investing in digital technologies and new transformation there. And that was because you had a younger workforce coming into the organization and pushing for it. And I feel like young people should be part of the same wave of transformation in mindsets in organizations in the future. And how might we do that?
Great point. I wonder if we could come to Mark on that, actually. Mark Lloyds, if we could come to you.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to get off mute. Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of young people working in the Rivers Trust movement, and also a lot of volunteering opportunities. As I mentioned, we've got 15,000 volunteers, but also, you know, we work with lots of companies, and we have corporate volunteering opportunities for people to get involved. And what, you know, I found with I remember doing a cleanup with Goldman Sachs, of all people, and they, of all companies, and they you know, they got all their graduate recruits out to clear up rubbish on the River Thames foreshore, and you know, they found it a really rewarding experience. I think they were pretty suspicious of being put into welly boots on a muddy beach in London, but they found it really rewarding, and the company found that it was a really positive team building exercise. So I think there are lots of opportunities to do that for companies, and you know, they can contact organizations like ours, and we can make those connections.
I think one additional build I'll just say is that, and the way certainly we look at it and work on it, is building closer relationships between businesses and then specific projects. So rather than it feeling like it might be one-off volunteering days, actually being more connected and linked to and seeing the change over time with specific projects that are happening on the ground. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Over to my colleague Tess. Yeah.
Morning all. Hi Mark, remotely, and congratulations on getting married. Just broke my chair. So I had a couple of questions. One was the investment return. You know, at the moment you've got a lot of very committed people, and to Jeremy's point, you know, raising, I think, what, 7.6 million, that's fantastic. But if that's a sort of family and friends or believers, you know, round, that's one thing. Raising serious capital, you know, I think we're still some way off unlocking that. And so how does it stop being a sort of, if I look at people I know who are trying to do this, they really have deep pockets personally, because that's the only way you can do it. The only way you can kind of take your land and do something with it in the short to medium term is if you've got a very deep well to draw on to make that work. So how do we change that? How do we make that funding available more upfront? And, you know, it's a brilliant laboratory up in Scotland. That's 511 acres of sheer gloriousness. But we've got 20 million plus acres in agricultural use. How do we scale? So those are my sort of 2 questions / points.
It's a great point. I wonder if Jeremy could kind of address that and sort of talk about the accessibility of finance and financing these kind of projects.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's quite an accurate observation, obviously. And in our case, many of these founding funders are individuals from the business world, and including financial institutions who I think see themselves as kind of front runners or pioneers for where they want their institutions to come. And it's the work we're doing that will help to bring that scale, because if we can make the natural capital accountancy completely verifiable, and if government can come in with a policy regime that actually kicks this all off, I think you'll be aware, or everyone here, that there is no biodiversity uplift credit policy in Scotland, and there's a pretty flimsy one down in England. And that will improve, because governments have promised that it will. And so, you know, you can smell the way to get to scale. And I've seen it before. I've seen this in the solar industry. I founded a solar company 25 years ago and watched all that happen and watched things go exponential. So I'm bullish and optimistic. Then the other thought about investment en route to that is, yes, a lot of people don't have a lot of money, and that's increasingly going to be the case. But we're going to be doing retail crowdfunding and bringing in co-owners at scale, we hope, if we're successful, so that there can be a degree of shareholding, co-ownership, and profit from our success, if indeed we're lucky enough to be successful.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's great. There's a question in the room here.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's for the panelists per se, but you mentioned a couple of times about companies working in partnership with their supply chains on nature-based solutions, and I've not really heard that before, so I'm just interested to know if you have any kind of examples or how that actually works.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think increasingly on the company side, there's a recognition that to make this more strategic, they should be looking at what is their actual supply chain, and therefore within their supply chain, how can they create impact. So let's use a practical example. Let's say fashion, right? So if you're a fashion brand, you're probably global, and you're probably sourcing a lot of your materials from the global south, and specifically certain inputs. So let's say cotton and others. Rather than just saying we're going to plant some trees, which is fine, that's what most brands are doing, you could say, right, well, how can we do regenerative agriculture in order to actually look at our supply chain and say, how can we have most impact where we have most impact, which is on our inputs and within our supply chain. So things like regenerative agriculture and other that can have both benefits within carbon and biodiversity, soil health, etc. And then with food, you'd obviously look at things like regenerative agriculture, and you can look at the work of Riverford and others who are actually looking at how do they work with the land in a fundamentally different way to produce high quality food. How do they work with their different producers as well, deeper in the supply chain? But it's you have to look, I think, industry and sector by sector, and then within that business by business.
Obviously, we're kind of going through a period of quite a lot of supply chain shock, and it's interesting to kind of think, why wasn't that sort of thought about beforehand? You know, these big issues, and I do wonder, like, what you put that down to. The sort of, why is low biodiversity, low cost kind of solutions been the kind of norm? Why is it that we're interested in planting trees as opposed to these sort of wider ecological benefits? What is it that's kind of stopping us from getting there, would you say? or stop the interest?
I mean, I want to pass over to panelists as well to share their views, but I'd say very top line is that we just haven't, I'd say we have been underdeveloped in actually a more systemic and interconnected view on how nature actually operates. Like, we just haven't got there. We've started with sustainability, what, 20 years ago? It took a long time to really see momentum on that. And I was kind of there at the early days. Then I feel like we finally moved to climate and carbon, brilliant. And now we're kind of getting to nature and biodiversity. And of course, all these things are interconnected. So I think we're seeing change, and we're seeing change at a fast pace. But yeah, it's playing catch up really, and in a decade that we need to catch up extremely fast.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question in the room. Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add one comment to one of the previous points that I think is kind of relevant. In the latest or the most recent US presidential election, one thing that I think is worth noting is Pete Buttigieg actually proposed something called a climate core. So in the US, they have things like the Peace Corps and stuff like that. But what he suggested was that in return for potentially subsidized college enrollment or fully funded tuition, students taking a gap year should be able to, engage in a fully structured course or program where they are really climate advocates. And I think that's an interesting point in the context of how we can provide more structured engagement for youth. The question I have is about engagement from one of those 3 points brought up earlier. I think Patagonia is often brought up as this kind of shining example of engagement, but I'm a bit hesitant there. Now, I love Patagonia. I own their shorts, but the one thing I would say is that I think, whether they will admit it or not, Patagonia's, altruistic mentality very much serves their profitability. Their whole image is based upon being good for the earth. They have like the Tin Shed Ventures, where they invest in companies that have SDG goals. And I think for them, yes, it's good, but it also, if you remove that element where they're supposed to really be advocates, their sales would go down, because I think people buy into that mentality and want to be part of that. My question is, how do you engage companies that don't have this natural link? If it's a bank, for example, or if it's Unilever or whoever it may be, when there isn't so natural a connection there, how do you get them to actually buy into that?
Great question. I wonder, do any of our panelists want to take that on? Maybe Josie, you'd be able to kind of talk about the collaboration with communities in that context.
Again, I own Patagonia shorts, I'll admit that as well. The thing that I always talk about with them is the fact that their sustainability team is really small. That's the bit that I've always loved, is that, in one of their books, it says that they only have 5 people in their sustainability team. And I love that idea of, actually, it's not my job, it's the rest of the team. So, we go by that same mantra, is that there's only 2 people in our sustainability team. So we try and do our engagement focused on the fact that, actually, because of the statements that we've made around wanting to build zero carbon homes and wanting the production of those homes to be zero carbon neutral as well, actually we found that, the latest person to join us from the civil engineering department, his dissertation topic was in zero carbon concrete. People are coming to us saying that at interviews, and I think that change in actually how we're presenting as a company has meant that the people coming in, especially the younger people coming into the business, is a core part of the reason they're working for us. It's a core part of how they then act in the business. So in terms of going back to the question, in terms of how do we engage with companies that don't feel that direct link, we do a lot of supply chain engagement. So it might be that there's a company that's working with that company that can then spread it out. So for our supply chain, there are carbon is a huge topic, let's say, for our ground workers, because actually they're the ones rolling around in massive bits of kit on a site, digging massive holes with equipment that at the moment can only run off of gas oil or HVO, which is like a vegetable alternative, sounds great, except that the producers can't quite confirm that it doesn't contribute towards deforestation, that it doesn't contribute towards the planting of palm oil. So, it's one of those things that we're tied between carbon and biodiversity there on how do we make the right decision. Now, when it comes to engaging with our supply chain, we tend to tackle lots of smaller projects. So we've started them out on plastics, and we did it as part of a campaign that we were doing with a group called the Ocean Sheroes, who are a group of 4 women that broke 2 world records rowing from between Hawaii San Francisco and Hawaii, they wanted to raise awareness of ocean plastic with these the Sea Bin project. They're all around the world, but I think they're based in Australia. And essentially, it's like a bin that sits in the water and that captures the floating debris and captures that in and does lots of monitoring as part of it. Now, we wanted to support them. We wanted to reflect back on how our business impacts on plastics and ocean plastics. And we did that with a project on a construction site and talked and got 13 of our supply chain that are on that site to sign a plastic pledge and to start learning more about how plastics affect or how their business affects plastic in the world and in the oceans. So it's a small targeted campaign that opens the door to conversations with that supply chain. So we now have 13 people that we know are engaged, that know how we work and how we try and enact change. And we can start moving them onto biodiversity. We can start moving them onto carbon, and they know the setup, they know the framework, they know what we're trying to achieve, and they are building up a history of positive change in an otherwise SME that has stayed the same since it was created.
That's fascinating. The fact that you kind of start small and with a subject and then can kind of educate and interest people in it is really interesting. We've got a few more questions. I believe Mark has his hand up. Oh no, yes he does. If we could go over to Mark again.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a brief answer on that that question as well. I mean, we've worked with a lot of companies who are signatories to the Courtauld Commitment and are involved in water stewardship. So Tesco's have worked with their supply chain, providing eggs from the Upper Wye Valley, which has been blighted with pollution from chicken waste, and Coca-Cola have done a lot of work with us on water stewardship around the areas where they grow sugar beet and also where they source water for their bottling plants, because they've got a real vested interest in having available water. And banks were mentioned, and they have a huge stake in their communities, the health of their communities and businesses, which are all reliant on healthy functioning water ecosystems. So there is an appetite there. I think it just needs a lot more facilitation and getting over some of those barriers that Mairead summarised really well at the beginning.
Thanks, Mark. I think we'll actually go back to you, Mairead, because I think we want to kind of finish up there. Is that right? Or we've got a little bit more?
Yes, I've got one closing slide that's about a collaborative opportunity, but is there any other burning? Do you want to do one more?
We have one more question from Jason Nise. Can we go to Jason?
Hi, chaps. Great stuff that you're doing, but a lot of it seems relatively domestic and relatively, dare I say, small scale. How do we scale this up internationally? Is the growth of for instance, is the growth of the voluntary carbon market creating good opportunity for funding of larger scale nature-based solutions, particularly in sort of areas where you need to do something like the rainforests of the Congo or the Amazon basin? What do people think about that?
Great question. On scale, Jeremy, could we come to you on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, but it's like renewable energy. What we need is very large numbers of small to medium scale projects. And that's what we are seeing now in the world after years of trying. None of them are particularly big, but there are just lots and lots of them, and they're growing like topsy. So we need the same thing in nature-based solutions, as would be my thought. And that requires obviously critical mass of people doing it. And most crucially, I tick the little question box about policy direction. The policy direction has to be set by government. That hasn't happened yet. Yeah, whereas it did in renewables.
Yeah, quite. Do you think it's part of a kind of wider neglect of kind of adaptation as a strategy?
Yes, and also Mairead's point about the appreciation. I mean, we are learning fast, all of us. Even people who think they know a lot about climate, like sort of many of my scientific friends, have been surprised by the stuff we've learned recently about peat and the importance of peat in the picture. And with nature-based solutions, the more the scientists dig, if you'll pardon the pun, what they're discovering about the importance of fungi in the soil and the health of the soil. I mean, a lot of this is new, hasn't been appreciated properly yet. And so there's a huge role for promulgating all that and educating folk, both in the corporate world and more generally.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jeremy. Over to you, Mairead, to finish
We
off.
can dive back to the slides if we may. So, and thank you so much to the panelists for sharing their knowledge and expertise and projects, and for all the really sharp questions. Obviously, there's not time to cover everything today, but I think we've had a really good cross-cut of questions there. Closing with a project that we have developed, codenamed Project Now, unsurprisingly, because now is the time to work with nature. And the idea is that why not bring together, and this is what we're doing with Project Now, a pioneering project to bring businesses and people together behind UK nature-based solutions on sea, land and city. So yes, individual businesses are working on individual solutions, but we need to get to scale, and we need to have big ambition, we need big vision, and we need big collaboration. And so the concept is that actually group of businesses coming on board, working with a group of diverse nature-based solutions that are high quality across the UK, and to do three things. One is to connect the businesses to the most, I won't say like Tinder for nature-based solutions, but kind of. So it's your perfect match. So it's nature-based solutions that are really well suited to you as a business that you can add real value to. And then also to bring your people on the journey. As Jeremy said, and as everyone on the panel said, this is learning as we go. And so actually, rather than do this in closed doors, this is opening it up for others to join in. So we will be taking people live on the journey and engaging teams and people so that they can be part of it rather than excluded from it. And then thirdly, we'll be doing a comms and media campaign to really highlight the power of nature-based solutions to affect policy and regulation in the UK, and in order to drive greater private sector engagement, which we know we critically need. There's a 44 to 97 billion pound capital gap, so like 50 to 100 billion pound gap between now and 2030 to reach our nature positive goals in the UK. Government isn't going to do it. We're in the lowest 10% performing countries worldwide on biodiversity. We have to come together, and we have to do it quickly, and it's about the power of partnership, but also power of storytelling and communication to bring people on the journey with us. So if you are interested, Triodos Bank have come on board as a partner, which is brilliant, because to Tessa's question, how you get the finance sector creating the right mechanisms around this is key. So we're really thrilled about that, and welcome interest from other financial sector organizations and businesses more broadly across industry. Do get in touch. And the final slide just has contact details. So if you would like to talk more about your business and your organization and how you can get involved in nature-based solutions, do get in touch. Happy to have a chat. And likewise, if there's interest on Project Now. And with that, I'll pass over to Barney for any final comments.
Yes, no, thank you, Mairead. And I think it's really interesting to kind of inject a sense of urgency into this. I think you're right. We need to get to a position at the end of the decade where nature-based solutions are a big part of how we combat this. And thank you to all of you for turning up today. Really appreciate it. And of course, to our lovely panelists too. I feel like I've got more of a sense of this. And on that subject, tonight we're holding another thinking on making sense of batteries. So if you want to come join us for that, Amber Rudd is going to be in the room. She wants to form a Western Battery Alliance, I've heard. So it could be quite interesting. But yeah, thank you. And if you've got any questions about Tortoise or the Accelerating Net Zero Coalition, come up to me. We can have a chat. And yeah, just thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.